I'd finished up the show. I had a good interview. I was writing down some show notes and things before I went to bed. And we hear probably 40 yards, maybe 50 yards in the woods from the house, like Ohio howl type howl. And it sort of ends with like a bark on the end. And it was super loud to the point where I felt it. And it was enough to scare the shit out of me. I was like, my goodness, dude. Wow. Like, what? It was literally, what was that? I don't know. What was that? Do you hear that? Yes, I heard that. I'm not going out. I'm not going out. No. And that's what people ask me. Did you go out and check? No, I did not. I did not want to see what it was. I didn't want to get any closer than we already were.
On this episode of Bigfoot Society, I'll be talking to Brian King Sharp from Sasquatch Odyssey. We'll be discussing some interesting Bigfoot encounters, Squatch Con coming up in Idaho, and Brian headed up to go on an expedition with Mr. Todd Standing. This is one episode you won't want to miss. Before we get into the episode, please take a minute to like where you're listening to the episode and subscribe and share this episode with a friend. That is the easiest, and it is free, and it just helps a lot. And we're going to the moon pretty quick, so you want to get on board. All right, let's get into the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, I've got the privilege of talking to Mr. Brian King Sharp tonight from Sasquatch Odyssey. How's it going, Brian?
I'm good, Jeremiah. How are you, man?
Dude, I'm doing good. I'm excited to finally get to chat with you on my show. How are things going on over there you're on the East Coast, right?
I am. I'm in North Carolina. It's been really stormy today. I was glad that the storms moved out because I've had to cancel a couple of interviews over the last, couple of months when we had these really bad storms come through. But luckily the skies parted. They knew I was going to talk to you tonight. So it's like, you can't be raining during Bigfoot Society. So
Brian, I've never heard how you got into Bigfooting. Share with me, what was it that got you into the Bigfoot game?
It's so weird because I feel like I've always kind of been in it because I grew up in the North Georgia mountains as a kid, and it was part of the culture there. It wasn't something that you just sat around and talked about at the dinner table, but we lived in a very rural, poor area. I grew up very poor. So, there was a lot of ginseng hunters and people out doing whatever they could to survive. And I remember distinctly hearing some of the ginseng hunters' stories that came down off of Lookout Mountain in the North Georgia area and northern Alabama, right on the border there with Georgia. And I remember one story in particular that stuck out to me for years was a couple of ginseng hunters. They ran down the mountain, basically rolled down this mountain. They came down beat up, bruised, tattered, and they kept saying that something chased them off the mountain. And I think they called it a wild man or hairy man or something. And of course, I was, maybe 10 when I heard the story for the first time. I had no idea what it was. But now in retrospect, I figure out that it was probably Bigfoot that they were talking about, that they had an encounter with on the mountain. And I do some stories. I call it story time on my show. I read some encounter stories, and we've even got a whole series going now on Dogman, right? So I was searching for stories, and a lady over in the UK actually put together a huge database. I don't know if you're familiar with Deborah Hatswell, but she does
Yes, she reached out to me. Yep.
Yeah, Deborah is awesome. So I've had her on the show a couple of times, but she has amassed this database, and she has it's an interactive map basically of every cryptid encounter you could possibly imagine. And she shared it with me, and she's like, pick it, whatever story you want, read it off there, And I was looking in Georgia one day, and lo and behold, I started searching in on this map in that area of Georgia, and I found a story from I guess it was the late 70s, maybe early 80s, of these ginseng hunters that told their story. It's a very short encounter, but it was the one that I grew up hearing through word of mouth as a kid. So it was really cool to have that come full circle as a podcaster now that deals in Bigfoot encounters, really, and to hear one and see it validated in writing on a database that it actually got reported to somebody, and somebody took the time to actually document their encounter. So, but that and experiences as a child that I sort of attribute to what could possibly be Bigfoot when I was like 12 years old. So, I feel like I've always had it. Well, I know I've always had an interest in it, but I really didn't get into it until I got out of law enforcement and I could actually sort of pursue that kind of line of inquiry, if you will, because as a cop, you don't talk about that stuff, right? I've said that plenty of times on the show. And, you've talked to plenty of police officers. Yeah. You just don't talk about that at work, So once I left that in 2016, I was really able to sort of pursue that interest, and that culminated in starting the show in like February of 2021.
That is just fascinating. What a fascinating area to grow up in. And was that the same area where like the Expedition Bigfoot Museum is, like that area of North Georgia, or?
It's similar to that. I would probably say, as the crow flies, I grew up in like the Somerville and Rome area. That's in Blue Ridge. So it's probably a couple of hours drive, maybe an hour and a half drive from that area. But same general, if you looked at a topo map and just erased the names of the area, it would look almost identical to the area where that Bigfoot Museum is. And I've been there a couple of times. It's a great place.
Oh, it's on my list of Bigfoot museums to go to.
It's a really cool place, man. I'd been there a couple of times, and we did a Vice show a couple of years ago. I think towards the end of 2021, they followed us around for about 10 days and filmed, and they were sort of highlighting the show and me and what I was doing. And part of the thing we did was travel from North Carolina here on our property to the Bigfoot Museum, and we filmed there for a couple of days, and they were super nice people. They allowed me full carte blanche access. I got to interview people on the spot, and it was a really cool experience. Really great people.
Did that air on Spike or on Vice?
It did.
Okay. What was the name of that?
It was the name of the series was In My Own World, and I think I was episode 7. It was called Bigfoot Hunters, of all things.
Oh, man, I gotta check that out. That sounds great, man. I love that sort of stuff. Brian, I would hope that most of my listeners already know what Sasquatch Odyssey is, because if you like Bigfoot Society, you're really gonna like Sasquatch Odyssey, and vice versa. But for the people that haven't heard of Sasquatch Odyssey yet, do you mind sharing what's your elevator pitch for what Sasquatch Odyssey is, how it came about, all that good stuff?
How it came about is a little longer than an elevator pitch, but the elevator pitch for the show really is, it's very similar to the Bigfoot Society in that I wanted to create a space where people could come on and share their encounter experiences and not feel crazy. That's it in a nutshell, right? Because when I really got into the subject, that's the one thing I really wanted to do, was talk to people who had experiences and had encounters. And it was born out of me doing it in the southeastern United States, because I talked to people, and I've talked to people since. I've interviewed Peter Byrne on the show, and we got into a little argument because he doesn't think Bigfoot has ever existed east of the Rockies. And I'm like, well, I've talked to tons of people that would disagree with you, Peter, but that's neither here nor there. But I really wanted to document as many cases as I could in Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, all the places that I've been and grown up in, just the southeastern United States in general. So that's kind of what the show was for me, as I wanted to document those cases. So that's how it started. The very first episode of the show ever was a roadside crossing encounter with a guy named Cale here in North Carolina. And very much like, I think you've been a lot better in this business than I started, because I've listened to some of your older shows, and they're much better quality than mine when I started.
Well, you didn't listen far enough back, but thanks, Brian.
I was literally recording the show on my cell phone on this free app called Rev.
I was too, on Anchor, dude. That's okay. So we get it.
We are brothers, man. We are brothers.
Go ahead.
So yeah, that was the thing. I recorded his interview, and I was fascinated with some of the things that he told me. He was a couple of hours. He's about 3 hours from me here in North Carolina. And just that in and of itself, the roadside crossing thing has sort of become this thing for me on the show, because you hear that all the time. These are such elusive creatures. They're, people go out and look for them for 50 years, and they never have an encounter. They never see a footprint. But yet somebody's driving to work in a Prius, and they almost smack one of them crossing the road at least 2 times a month, So that was sort of the beginning of, well, I'd say the beginning of the end for me. I just went down the rabbit hole because I was hooked at that point. And when I talked to him, I was like, I've got to do something with the story. I can't be the only one who hears this story. So I was like, I'm going to start a podcast. I don't know if anybody will listen, but I'm going to start a podcast and put these out there and let people hear these stories from North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia. So that's what I did. And one episode turned into 5, turned into 10. And, luckily through the universe was looking out for me. Wes Germer from Sasquatch Chronicles, about 3 months into the show, he reached out and said, "Hey man, I like your show. I listen to your show, but your audio sucks." He's like, "It's awesome though. Let me help you with your audio." And I'm like, holy crap. I'm not, what am I going to say? No, of course not. So he called me up and we spent a couple of hours on the phone talking, and he gave me some ideas, and I'm writing a list down of things that I should order and boards that I should get to record the show and microphones and all this stuff. And, a couple of weeks later I had everything in, and I remember I set the board up and I was a lost ball in high weeds, dude. I had no idea what I was doing. So I sent him a text and I was like, I need some help. So we hopped on FaceTime and he spent like 45 minutes helping me dial my board in, and it literally changed the show overnight. The audio quality, and it still had some issues. We still, every day you improve, you figure out a new way to do something, and you work constantly honing your craft, but literally overnight it changed the show. And I've had to go back and remaster some of those earlier episodes because they were such good quality content that was just crap audio. So now I have the software and I have the ability to go back and remaster those shows and sort of give them new life and re-release them. And people have, I've gotten a couple of Apple reviews lately that's just like, holy crap, I'm so glad you did that, because I got to hear the story in a whole new way. So like episode 9, I had Jeff Meldrum on the show. And it was horrible. I mean, the audio, I overcompressed it when I was editing it. It was horrible. And I just remastered that a couple of weeks, maybe a month or so back. And it's now listenable. So you guys can go back and listen to Dr. Jeff Meldrum. He was one of the first episodes I did on the show. So, and I'm still working my way through that.
So one, that's amazing how Wes stepped out and said, "Hey, I'm going to help this dude." What I love is when people in the community, even though they're doing the same thing, they're helping each other out. For example, I'm going to shout you out real quick, and we won't get into super specifics, but after I was on your show last time, we had a very intense 30-minute conversation or so of that was so encouraging to me and put me on the right track to one day doing this full time and giving me the hope to do it. So I just want to say thank you, Brian, for taking the time to, really change the course of what I'm doing here. So that was just really, really a life-changing chat we had for sure.
I believe in karma, man. In karma. That's I've always said that no matter what, and I help a ton of people behind the scenes with their shows because I love doing that. But if you get to the point where you have the ability to help other people, like Wes didn't have to do that for me. He could have just said, "Oh, that's just another podcast," or whatever. And for whatever reason he chose to do that, it changed my world. It really did. And I've been forever grateful for that. And if I ever have the opportunity, and I said it to him, I believe, if I ever have the opportunity to pay anybody back or to pay this forward, I'm going to do it tenfold if I can, because, some people think things are competition. I see it the complete opposite. Everybody who succeeds at doing what I do just makes my life better, and it makes the world better for everybody because there's more places for people to go for information. And that's what it's really all about for me, is getting the encounters out there, getting the information in people's hands and letting them make up their own mind about them. So
100%. I agree with that, my dude. So you are involved with something cool that's about to happen relatively soon, but I would love you to share about what's going on out in Idaho, the cool thing that you guys are putting out there, that the convention that's coming up soon.
Yeah, that sort of just fell in my lap. I had Brandon Hoffheinz from Squatch Nut reached out to me months and months ago, and we were going back and forth about some other things, and he had some encounters, so I invited him on the show. He came on the show, shared his encounters. Great dude, just super high energy. I just immediately was drawn to his stories, and we started talking, and he was really looking forward to putting together a Bigfoot conference in Idaho. And he reached out to me. We kicked around some ideas, and he just started running with it. And the next thing I know, he calls me up and he says, "Hey, I've got Dr. Jeff Meldrum. He's committed to coming out. Cliff Bergman's coming out. I'd love to have you on the panel. Would you come out and speak at the conference?" And I'm like, "Sure, man. Absolutely. Let's make it happen." And I had been trying, for those that do listen to my show, I've been chasing my tail and herding cats for probably 5 months now. I've been trying to do a roundtable discussion on the enhanced, non-interlaced version of this Freeman footage from 1992. So I'm sure most people who listen to your show are very educated in Bigfoot. You do a very good job with that, Jeremiah. But for those that don't know what the Freeman footage is all about, it's basically Paul Freeman. He was a pretty prolific Bigfoot investigator back in the late 80s, early 90s, through the 2000s, really, before he passed away. And he's a kind of a controversial figure in Bigfoot. As I dug into his history and dug into things, I sort of figured this out, because if you talk about footage and possible proof of the species, the Patterson-Gimlin film is usually number one in everybody's mind. And normally it's the Freeman footage right there at number two, right? So it's a pretty big deal. But in a nutshell, this guy's basically out doing his thing, and he films what looks like a Bigfoot crossing over this path. And everybody famously, the famous line that most people recognize is, "Oh, there he goes."
Yep.
Right. So it's very grainy. I mean, it was on 8mm video in 1992. So if you've been around long enough to put your mind back in 1992 and think about what grainy video looks like back then, that's what you're going to get with the Freeman footage. So almost immediately after this footage came out, Doug Hychek started looking at it. He started digging into it, and he was working his tail off to try to enhance this footage, because in part of the footage, and Doug just talked about this on Saturday on my show, if you listen to the footage carefully, you hear Paul say at one time, "Oh, there's more than one of them." Mm-hmm. So he can see with his naked eye that there's more than one of these creatures there. You just can't make it out in the film. So that was just digging into Doug's skin. If you know Doug well enough to know,
oh yeah,
he's going to start digging, and he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants. So that's what he did. And he worked on this for basically 20 years. He eventually had to go to the government, to the military, to get some software to really enhance this footage, do the non-interlacing, and make it so he could actually see what he was wanting to see. And of course, he made a discovery of what's now famously called the baby lift, or the baby Bigfoot that's in the footage. So Cliff's also been working on it. Cliff has done his own sort of version of cleaning up the film and done some work to get it a little bit farther along, just like Doug has. But recently, within the last year, Michael Freeman, Paul Freeman's son, wrote the book, The Freeman Files. And as a part of that, you got to see this footage along with I think it's 10 plus hours of audio that Paul recorded over the course of his life out researching. And that's all a part of the book as well. But what I was going to do, or wanted to do, I reached out to Michael, I reached out to Doug, and I said, "Hey, I'd like to get, Cliff Bergman was on board. Cliff was going to come back on the show. I was going to have Doug on, Michael Freeman. I was going to get Russ Jones, Dr. Russ Jones on. And we were going to kind of release some of the footage on the show and then have a roundtable." But just like you and I were talking before we went live here, it is almost impossible to get a lot of schedules lined up. And you're talking 5 or so people with that kind of schedule. It's been really tough. Every time I'd send out an email, I'd shoot people text messages and say, "Hey, I've got these 5 days lined up over the next week. Can you guys make it?" There was always somebody. It was Michael saying, "Oh, I can't do it." Or Cliff's like, "Oh, sorry, I'll be out of town." So I thought a little light bulb went off in my head when Brandon reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm going to have Dr. Jeff Meldrum's going to be there. Cliff Bergman's going to be there. You're going to be there." Thinking, okay, well, what 2 better people to have a conversation with about the Freeman footage than those two? let's reach out to Michael Freeman. So I shot him a text and said, hey, man, this thing's coming up. You think you'd be interested? He tried to work out his schedule. Okay, boom, he's on board. So now we've got Michael coming. So then I reached out to Doug and said, hey, man, can you come? And he's like, unfortunately, I will be, 55 miles deep in the woods that weekend. But hey, why don't I send Alex up there and I'll send part of our crew from Legend Meets Science 2 to film the thing. And so I won't be there, but I'll send those guys. And I'm like, okay, well, that'll work. So yeah, that's kind of where we are. And then I had another idea. I said to Brandon, this is kind of historic, dude. Like, very few people have ever seen this non-interlaced, enhanced, slowed down version of this film that's so crystal clear. Why don't we work with Doug and Alex and those guys? And why don't we figure out if there's a way to make this conference available virtually? Like, if people want to attend virtually, they can get a link and they can see the video. They can hear us break it down. They can hear us talk about it. They can be involved in the situation and they won't have to travel to Idaho. It's like 2,000 miles for me. So I know it's a tough trek for a lot of people to get there. Right. And he's like, that's a brilliant idea. So we got with Doug, Alex, and Blaine and those guys, and they're fantastic. So anything they set their mind to, they get it done. And we just rolled it out. I had Doug and Brandon on Saturday. I just released it. The show came out yesterday. But we sort of rolled out the announcement. Doug put together a cool intro. It's about a minute long that sort of describes what's happening. It's kind of a trailer, if you will, for the upcoming conference. So that was a really long answer to say. It's a really cool conference. If you could be there in person, we obviously want you to be there in person. But if you can't, you have the ability to see it virtually. And all you got to do is go on. And Doug has different packages. It's hangar1publishing.com. You can go over there and it's right there on the homepage. And I think the lowest package is $19.95. So you can literally be a part of this for less than $20, see the footage, be a part of the roundtable, and really, in my opinion, be a part of history. I'm shocked that more people aren't talking about what's going on with the Freeman footage, the enhancements. And so hopefully we'll stir up a little interest. And if people are interested in it, they can attend it virtually. So I don't know if it's ever been done, honestly. I know they've probably done some virtual conferences. I think you're actually involved in one that's coming up that I saw something about online recently, but
yes, it's like, am I? Yes, I am.
I do my homework, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I'm Ryan Sprague is putting that on. Anomicon. It's going to be a good one. Yeah, I'm excited.
But as far as Bigfoot, I've never seen it done. I've been to a couple of conferences. I've attended a couple of conferences. I've spoken at a couple of conferences already this year. And I've not seen anybody that's done anything virtual like that allows people to actually be a part of what the speakers are doing on stage in real time that I'm aware of. I could be wrong.
I mean, it raises the bar for, imagine if all Bigfoot conferences, like in, the Ohio Bigfoot conference, the big guys, like if they could do the same thing, it'd be fantastic. And I mean, for the cost of such a low cost, like $19.99, I mean, it's a no brainer that you want to be involved with seeing what's going on. So is this going to be the best ever footage of the Freeman footage then? Like, this is the best you're ever going to see it.
Oh, hands down. There's no way it's ever going to get any better. It is phenomenal. The first time I saw it, Michael sent it to me after I had him on the show, and I pulled it up on my computer and my jaw dropped because it's so freaking clear. There's no, even to this day when I watch the Patty film, and I've recently changed my opinion on that too. So we can talk a little bit about that if you want, but I've seen that so many times, and there's this little tickle in the back goes, oh, I'm just not 100% there. But after I had the conversation with Michael and I saw this enhanced version of the film, I was 100% convinced. You're not going to convince me otherwise that that's not a Sasquatch and that's not a baby that's picking up off that tree. Just not going to happen.
Wow. Don't you get a copy of the Freeman Bigfoot files? That's one of the tiers with this as well.
Yes, you get an ebook. Yes, you get the book with everything. So you can literally read the book and look in and see what Paul was doing in his research. And you can hear things in his own words. You can hear him talking. His audio diary is there. And it's amazing. I mean, the book itself is like $70 if you buy it by itself. But as a part of one of the tiers that you can attend this conference virtually, you can get a copy of the ebook and get access to all of that in perpetuity. Forever, it's yours. So
when I was reading through that and listening to everything before, I had Michael Freeman on Bigfoot Society a while back. I just remember listening to all the Paul Freeman audio clips, and it's like you're literally listening to the Paul Freeman podcast is pretty much what it is. And it is, but you really get to like know how he is as like what his character is. It's fascinating. Like people, watch the conference live. Also, you get the book, and the book is so worth reading. Michael did a great job with that. So I'm excited that you guys are putting this together, that the High Checks figured out how to make it all, the tech wizard stuff. Very, very cool. You're such a busy guy, Brian. You got a lot of really cool stuff. And I appreciate that because you've gotten to the point where like you're doing some cool stuff, and it's very inspiring. But another thing I want to hear from you is you are taking a trip soon enough where you are headed up to a special place with a particular gentleman. And I'm going to let you just present it the way that you would like, because I think it's a very fascinating story.
Yeah, it's another thing that sort of, wow, I won't say that fell in my lap. That was more of a long time coming. And I had the opportunity to take this trip last year, and I just couldn't make it work with my schedule, but the opportunity presented itself again, and I am going up to BC, Canada, to the Radium area on an expedition with Todd Standing in October. And I say that was it took a lot longer to get to that point because it took me probably a year to get Todd on my show. And I would say the reason for that is because I called him a hoaxer for about a year before I got him on the show. And, I have strong opinions about his videos that he presents as evidence, in his documentary and his YouTube channel and, wherever he puts those out there, and it really took getting Survivor Man Les Stroud on the show, I think, to persuade Todd to come on the show, because I don't know, it's probably 2 weeks after I had Les on the show, then Todd was like, okay, I'll come on your show. Because we talked about it for 30 minutes, and had a really in-depth conversation, because it was the closest thing I could get, because Les had been out with Todd. He spent weeks in the woods with him, and I wanted to get Les's perspective because I respect Les. I think he's a very honest guy, and I knew he wasn't going to BS me when I asked him these tough questions. So I did, and it's not about Todd as a person. I've never wanted it to be about Todd as a person. It's about Todd's evidence and what he presents as evidence. So that's where we kept it. And I asked Les, I said, what were your concerns about the videos? And he was honest. He said, look, dude, I held the cards in my hand. I held the video, the medium in my hand, and the videos are real. I don't see anything as far as, me being able to point out this is fake and this is why. He said, my concern was, where's the B-roll? Where's the leading up to, and where's the after that it happens, right? And so I was like, we got into that on the show. And he's like, that's the one thing that I've, called him out for. And of course, Todd has these answers, and Les sort of went through that on the show. I think Les was episode 68 of my show, if anybody wants to go back and listen to that. The remastered version has come out in the last month or so, but if you look for Les Stroud, you'll find the episode. But so we get into that, and Les is like, that was the only thing, because it's the typical thing, right? If you look at any Bigfoot video online, you go onto YouTube and it's just boom, somebody's filming trees, and then all of a sudden something walks out. Where's the backstory? Why were you there? Why were you filming the tree? Why were you having the camera pointed in that direction, right? Where's the footage that led up to that? Did you walk up for 30 minutes and then, that kind of stuff? So that was the one thing that really stuck out to Les, and he really never got answers as far as why. There was always, well, this happened, the camera went dead, or this happened, or that happened, but there was never really any real explanation. So, it didn't really change my opinion. And then once Todd came on the show, I asked him some tough questions about it, and he defended himself. To his credit, he came on the show knowing what to expect. He was coming into an environment with a guy who had called him a hoaxer for a year, and we had a very amicable conversation. And we didn't always agree on everything. We sort of agreed to disagree. But at the end of that conversation, I had a better respect or a new respect for Todd the man. He's not a bad guy. We've talked afterwards. We've had conversations. He's got a couple of my videos. I've let him use some of my interviews on his YouTube channel. So I just have a problem with what's happening as far as the evidence is concerned. So, and he basically invited me at that point. He's like, look, come up here and let me prove it to you. Put your money where your mouth is. Come up, go out on an expedition. I'll take you out. He never guarantees that you're going to see a Sasquatch, but he's like, just come on out and you'll see the real deal. So that's what I'm doing in October, man. I'm gonna put my money where my mouth is and go up and take the trip. And I've said it before. I wish those things were real. I wish that those were real Bigfoot. I don't think that Todd hasn't had experiences. I think he has had experiences. And probably continues to have some sort of experiences. I've interviewed several people who have been on expeditions with him who have seen a Sasquatch and or had some really intense experiences. And who knows, I'm going in with an open mind, but I'm going in with the blinders off, and I'm not going to be an easy customer. Let's just put it that way. I'm going to go in respectfully and see what happens.
So, Brian, what kind of equipment are you bringing up there for tech documentation?
First and foremost, I am looking into a brand new camera. I do not have a great camera. I'm like most people. My only camera has been my iPhone for years, but I wanted a really good camera because I'd like to do some on-site interviews. So I want really good quality video. So I'm getting a camera that'll shoot HD quality video, high quality audio, and really good pictures with a decent zoom, because I'm anticipating that I may be taking some long range photos. So I'm investing about $500 into a camera, and I'm also going to invest in some really good audio recorders because I want to have those on hand. I'm planning on having an audio recorder going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I found a couple of models through some good friends of mine, and some listeners of the show have reached out and done some recommendations. So I think I found a Sony that records for like 50 hours straight on one battery. So I'm really excited about that. If I can take enough batteries up there and keep that going I'm going to be there for like 7 days. So it's going to be a lot of audio. It's going to be a ton of stuff to go through when I get back, but I think it's going to be worth it because I'm going to have it go on 24/7. And like I said, I like to do some on-scene, interviews, maybe with Kyle, maybe with Todd. And then, of course, we'll probably do a debrief and have them both back on the show once we get back to talk about what happens, what doesn't happen, and what all that good stuff.
Absolutely. That sounds like it's going to be a fascinating journey. What kind of evidence would it take up there for you to, at the end, to be like, okay, there's Bigfoot here. I experienced something. It's legit. Like, what would it take?
That's a good question, man. I don't know. Outside of actually having a visual and seeing one, that's the other thing. I'm taking binoculars. I have a brand new pair of binoculars that was going with me as well. So, outside of seeing one, I really don't know what to say, man, because I have found so many things here on my property. I found a footprint like 3 weeks ago, and it's, the first thing that I go to is Occam's razor. It's not a footprint. It's pareidolia. It's something else. It just looks like a footprint. I'm still questioning my own stuff. I just posted a bunch of pictures from yesterday. I did a hike. Yesterday, Sunday. Sunday we did a hike, and I found a bunch of really weird tree breaks. Another what looks like a nest site, and there's like probably a 300-pound cedar log that's balanced in between two trees about 10 feet up, and a weird area where there's a pine tree stuck into what looks like a den on the side of a mound. It's just really weird stuff. You can see the pictures on the Sasquatch Odyssey Instagram, and I think I did it on TikTok as well, but just really weird stuff. So I find that kind of stuff here, and I just sort of brush it off. I sent the picture of the footprint, or what looks like a footprint, to Doug. I texted it to him, and I'm like, tell me I'm not crazy, dude. Like, this looks like a footprint, right? And he's like, well, it looks like a handprint to me. And he's sort of pointing out where it looks like maybe a thumb. And I'm like, I don't know. It's just such a slippery slope with all of that stuff. So unless I saw what made the footprint, if I didn't see a Sasquatch stepping into the creek where I found the footprint, I'm never going to definitively say it was from a Sasquatch. So I think it would take me seeing. And I've said, people have asked me that question. Yeah, I was on Pine Island Research as a guest earlier a couple of weeks ago with Jeff, maybe a week ago. And it's like I told him, even if I'm up there in the camp and Sasquatch comes in and sits down and has a cup of coffee at breakfast, it's not going to change my opinion about what's happened with the videos and the evidence in the past. Now, of course, I would say had a cup of coffee with a Sasquatch maybe, but unless it looked exactly like one of the ones that was in the video and I knew it was a real Sasquatch, it's not going to change my opinion of the evidence that we've seen over the last 10 years. But then I would come back and absolutely say, yes, there's activity there because I saw one. So I think that's what it would take for me is I would actually have to be able to see one and then know that that was real.
And that isn't me laughing at Todd. That's just me laughing at a visual I had in my head that was so ridiculously funny. But man, I am excited to hear what happens from your journey up there, your future journey. That's going to be great. The cool thing, I love talking to people on Bigfoot Society. I know you love talking to witnesses as well. Is there a certain interview that sticks out in your mind that you're like, man, if Sasquatch Odyssey could only be one episode and listeners could only listen to one, like this is the one? Is there something that sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, there's probably a couple.
Okay.
I think, honestly, it sounds kind of cheesy, but I would say the Les Stroud interview was probably one of my favorite interviews ever, just because of the person that he is and just the genuine honesty that he exudes about everything in his life. He's had a fascinating life way outside of Bigfoot with his show, the way that happened. I mean, he created a genre that we enjoy to this day, with this sort of lost, in the woods, naked and afraid, alone, all those shows. So just that journey, that's kind of where we started the interview because I was a fan of Survivor Man before the Survivor Man Bigfoot stuff. So I think that gives you a really good portrait if you were just to listen to that episode, what the show's really about. And then the conversation we have about Bigfoot and the open and the honest conversation about some of the, I was on a show recently where somebody said, I don't use the word woo anymore. I call it high strangeness. So I'll say the high strangeness that has been involved in some of his experiences out in the woods. And it was just a really good conversation. And he presents it very well, obviously, because that's what he does for, decades on television.
Yeah.
And then just recently, I'd say within the last couple of months, there was a hunter, I think his name was Daniel, and his really weird experience. I say weird because if you listen to the episode, it sounds really intense, and it is intense. It's about an hour and a half long because he tells every minute detail of his encounter because he is just reliving it. And then I found out why afterwards. People gave me guff. Of course, you get those messages. You should have shut that guy up. It took an hour and a half to tell a story that should have lasted 40 minutes.
Absolutely, Brian. Go ahead. Sorry.
You know where I'm coming from. But you have to, as a host, at least for me, you have to just shut up and let people go through their process. And I found out afterwards, he told me sort of after it was over, that was the first time, like he's told pieces to his wife. He had told pieces of his encounter to his dad. He had told a piece to a good friend, but that was basically it. He had never told the entire story from beginning to end to anybody but me. So it was very important for him to get every detail because he told me, he's like, this is the first and only time I'm telling it and I'm done. I'm moving on with my life because it was such a traumatic experience for him. He admitted openly on the show. He's like, I tried to bury myself in a bottle, dude. Like I tried to drown it in a bottle of whiskey for a year or two after this encounter because I was so messed up by it. But in a nutshell, if you listen to the episode, you'll get it's tree knocks. He's out elk hunting with his dad. His dad goes into his area. He goes into his area and he starts hearing wood knocks and he starts following the wood knocks. They'll stop, would knock again. He follows where the sound's coming from. This happens over the course of about 30 minutes. This goes on, and it culminates with him being basically 20 feet away from this thing, stepping out behind the tree. They kind of have this oh crap moment of, do I shoot it? Do I run? What do I do? It's a whole thing. But it's a very, very intense encounter. But He's sitting in his pickup truck outside of his house during this interview. And he's got his phone up on the dash, and I'm watching him, and I'm just intense. I'm just right into his face and his body language the whole time. And this dude was traumatized by this experience. So that was one that really stuck out to me in intensity. And, at the end of his encounter, wood knocks are pretty common, and this is of course subjective, and it's probably a lot of projection, but at the end of it, he felt really upset with himself because he should have known better, because he felt like this thing was luring him in with the wood knocks. And I'd never heard that before. He's like, I said, why do you think that, man? And he said, because it only knocked when I stopped walking. If I stopped and I wasn't making progressive movements towards where the knock was coming from, it would knock again. I would move forward. And when I stopped again to listen, it would knock. And he felt like he was being lured in. And of course, people have said, I don't believe that. I don't think he was being lured in. Well, that was certainly his opinion on the situation. And I'm going to take his word for it because I wasn't there and he was. So that's a really interesting encounter that has stuck out to me, out of 300 plus shows. It's hard to say, what's the best or what sticks out, but just those two, I think if you wanted a snapshot of what the show is really all about, it would be those two episodes. It's sort of you get the celebrity part of Bigfoot, because I do interview a lot of people who are somebody in the Bigfoot community. That's part of it, but the majority of the show is about Joe Schmo and Jane, whomever, who has had really intense encounters with something that they just can't explain. That's what it's really all about for me.
I love that. No, man, that's so good. Definitely going to have those in the show notes. Brian, what do you feel after all these years of talking to people and probably doing some research yourself? What do you think this creature is?
That is such a tough question, man. I just literally last night, I finished the last chapter of Matt Pruitt's The Phenomenal Sasquatch book.
Yeah.
And those questions that Matt asks in the book still stick out to me to this day, and those two questions are, we clearly know the phenomenon exists, right? Bigfoot phenomenon has existed for thousands of years, but are they a real creature? Or do they only exist in the minds of the people who believe that they're there? I believe that they're a flesh and blood creature. I believe that they are real. I just don't know what they are. I think they're probably some sort of, the Gigantopithecus thing has been out there for a lot of years, and I've never really subscribed to that. I think it's more some sort of a possible Australopithecine of some sort, maybe, I don't know. But I think it's some sort of maybe a relict hominoid, or possibly even a hominin that's existed without being detected. Well, I can't say without being detected. It's detected 100 times plus a year with people seeing them. So, but undiscovered. Let's put it that way. I think it's some sort of undiscovered bipedal ape-like creature that we still don't know what they are.
So I love it. I'm very close to that myself. I'm right there with you, man. I'm in the flesh and blood camp. My caveat to that is animals can do weird stuff. So who's to say it can't do weird stuff too? I mean, you look at, I was at the Omaha Zoo with my family a few weeks ago. The echidna has a way of, it can sense electrical pulses through a sensor, the animal equivalent of that, and it's a snout. Who's to say that there's another creature that can't do that, something like that? But it's very, very wild stuff. Have you ever been, besides you're going to go with Todd Standing out to Radium, have you ever been on an actual, let's take a weekend, let's go out, let's go hardcore squatching? Have you ever done that, or is this your first time going out with Todd?
Yeah, this will be the first actual Bigfoot expedition for me, right? I mean, everything else for me has been on my own property. That's one of the reasons that we purchased so much property when we bought the 40 acres that we own 5 or 6 years ago, is I wanted to create sort of a sanctuary for me and other like-minded people who may want to come out and just see what's out there. And I had no idea that there was even a possibility of having any kind of activity on the property. But we've had some weird stuff happen here with vocalizations and, weird rock formations, possible gifting stuff that's happened, But just the vocalizations alone for me would have been enough to drive me to continue to go out. I used to do tons of night hikes and sort of many, once a week I'd go out for 4 or 5 hours and just hike after dark and explore certain areas of the property as much as I could, obviously, with a headlamp or whatever. And after we heard some of the vocalizations I've heard here, I stopped the night hikes, dude, because I'm like,
really? Oh, snap.
Yeah. I've heard some weird stuff that has just made me say, no, thank you. I'm not going outside.
Listeners might know there's different types of vocalizations. You can hear like Ohio howl, stuff like that. So are you able to describe what kind of stuff were you hearing at night?
The majority of it started when we put a hot tub on the end. We have a 400 square foot tiny house. So it's a really tiny house in the middle of 40 acres, right? So it's nothing but woods around us. So we have a deck out front and we put a hot tub out front. And I think it was 2 winters ago was the first time we had the hot tub. And, we're out there at midnight drinking a glass of wine in the hot tub. It's 40 degrees, and I was probably, February, March. And but here there's a huge ridge behind us with there's about 150 to 200 acres of just raw land behind us on the back of the ridge. And in that general area, probably, I'm estimating mile and a half, we could hear what sounded like Ohio howl kind of vocalizations. And heard that several times. I'm like, oh yeah, just kind of, it sounds weird. Just finish up your glass of wine, go in the house and whatever. And it wasn't something we'd hear every single night. We'd be out there pretty much every night. I'd say maybe twice a week, you'd hear something like that. And just, I think maybe that same year, so we're talking 2 years ago, that same year, in the spring, it was still cool outside, but we have nothing but windows in the loft where we sleep in the house. So we had the windows open. I'd finished up the show. I'd had a good interview. I was writing down some show notes and things before I went to bed. And we hear probably 40 yards, maybe 50 yards in the woods from the house, Ohio howl type howl. And it sort of ends with a bark on the end. And it was super loud to the point where I felt it. And it was enough to scare the shit out of me. I was like, my goodness, too. Wow. What? It was literally, what was that? I don't know. What was that? Do you hear that? Yes, I heard that. What?
and then they're like, Brian, you're the guy who talks to people about you go down with it. I don't know, man.
I'm not going out. I'm not going out.
Yeah.
And that's what people ask me did you go out and check? No, I did not. I did not want to see what it was. I didn't want to get any closer than we already were. And of course, people said, well, it was a person. No, it wasn't a person. And I don't know, man. I just, and like I said, we found the footprint. That's probably been 3 weeks ago now, about 3 weeks ago on a hike. Found the footprint on a hike, all the weird stuff, the tree breaks, the stacked fulcrum type things, found a rock formation stacked at the top of the ridge back in the back where we stop and usually have a snack in that area. And then literally 2 days later, I can't remember who I told. I was a guest on another show when I talked about this recently. We're in the country, so, I have a tendency to get up and go out on the porch and pee off the porch at 3:00. Right? Yeah. So I did that. And I'd never heard anything that ever resembled a tree knock until that night. It was about 3:15, and I hear what sounds like 4 power knocks. Bam, 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 bam. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? Just out of the blue. Never heard it before. And it was like bam, 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 bam. It was really, really fast. And I'm thinking, okay, it's 3:15. Now, I used to live in Atlanta. I was a city of Atlanta cop, right? 3:00 in the morning in Atlanta, you're liable to hear anything. Not in Lenore, North Carolina, dude. They roll up the sidewalks at 7:30 on the weekdays. And this was a Wednesday. I don't know what it could have been. I really don't. Like, nobody's up hammering at that time of the day. Nobody's doing construction, across the ridge. I don't know, man. It was just really, really weird. And I didn't see what did it. I would call it power knocks. It sounded like tree knocks to me. So I don't know. Just really weird stuff. But
have you contemplated putting up like any recorders around your property? Audio recorders?
I've talked about that. Doug has been after me. David Ellis has been after me for years to be
got to, man.
And I just, I'm going to do it. I'm ordering a couple of those. I'm definitely going to take some to the outing with me in October up at Radium, and I'm going to order them and start using them here so I can get proficient with them and understand them. So I'm going to start doing that and putting those out on the property because it is a good idea. Like, I would love to have some of the stuff that we've heard captured on audio. It would be amazing. But of course, it's like everything else, And I'm really, I've said it plenty of times on the show. I'm apprehensive to even put it out there because I am the dude with the Bigfoot podcast. And then you start talking about having things happen, and people are like, I don't know about that.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I get it.
But, I just, if people listen and people know me well enough, they know I'm no BS. Like, I just put it out there. It is what it is. I don't make anything up. You'll never hear me say anything definitive about Bigfoot because I don't know unless I know. If I see it, now if I see it making a footprint, I'm going to tell you, yeah, I casted that and I saw the Bigfoot made it. But otherwise, I'm just going to say it looks like a footprint. It could have been a wood knock. I don't know. Definitely wasn't a woodpecker at 3:15 in the morning.
Yeah, man, that would be bad news. Do you have any thoughts? There's a topic that I love, and I love talking to people from Oklahoma. I love Oklahoma, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, that LaFleur County. Do you have any thoughts about Bigfoot in Oklahoma? I just love it so much, dude.
I have talked to so many people recently. It's turned into the Oklahoma Area X Bigfoot podcast because it started with Daryl Collier, then it was Michael Mays, and then it was Brian Brown, and Matt Pruitt's actually coming on. Matt's coming on at the end of the month. I've got an interview scheduled with him. I'm going to get to hang out with him at the Sasquatch, the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference on Saturday. So that'll be fun. He'll be up there peddling his books and hanging out with Cliff, and I'm going to get to hang out with those guys. But Oklahoma Sasquatch is crazy, man. I just had an interview with Randy Harrington last night.
Oh, yeah.
Randy and I talked for about an hour and a half, and he has got some wild encounter stories from Oklahoma, LaFleur County in particular, at a campsite where he had it's a crazy encounter. I don't know if you've heard it or not, if you've talked to Randy.
It's the one where they unzip is it that one?
It's the one where he's in the truck. He's in the bed. He's in the cab of his truck, and he's got everything blinded out. He's put curtains and things up to make him think, to fool the Sasquatch into thinking he's not in the campsite because he's there in like February. And it's a whole wild story, but basically he hears rattling on the trash can. Something's picking up and pulling a cinder block off of a trash can lid and lifting it up. And he looks out the front, he peeks out his little blind that he's got set up in the cab of his big dually pickup truck, and he sees two Sasquatch. And then they go around behind his truck, and one of them climbs up on the bed of his truck onto looking over the bed, these ladder racks of his truck. It's crazy. It's a crazy story. But that happened in a campsite in LaFleur County.
I've talked to him before. It was after I went out with Tate last August to go squatching in Iowa. And I captured something on audio where it unzips my tent. Really messed with me for a few weeks, still messes with me. And then I talked to Randy and he's like, oh yeah, they totally could unzip stuff. I'm like, oh man, Randy, now you're freaking me out. That's going to be a great episode. I'm looking forward to that, man. That's good stuff. Oh boy. Hey, I haven't asked this question for a long time, but you're an educated individual. Do you have? I'm sure you have an awesome Bigfoot bookshelf. What are your top 3 go-to squatching books?
Well, that's changed recently because I like to change it up. I would say number 1 on the book list is probably I'm looking at them now. Sasquatch Legend Meets Science.
Nice.
And I do have the Quantum Bigfoot. It's there. It's in the rotation because I think there's some things to be gleaned there from, some of the things that Ron talks about. And I think, the top 3 would be rounded out now with Matt Pruitt's book.
Wow. Very cool. Okay. It is. I have it right here and it's next up to be read. So I'm excited to dig into it.
Buckle your seatbelt, dude. You probably ought to get your thesaurus out because Matt uses words that I had to look up myself. I talked to him recently. I called him I called him about a month or so back because I've got a TV thing going on and I was interested in maybe him being a possibility of being involved in it. So I called Matt up and we were talking about something else and we started talking about podcasting. And I just came back from a conference here in Encounter Quest in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And I told Matt, it's so funny that I have so many listeners, obviously from my home state, that kind of follow. If they know I'm going to be somewhere in North Carolina, they try to make it out if they can. And I probably had 6 or 8 people come up to the table. And I like to ask them, what's your favorite episode of the show? What do you like so much about the show? If there's one, kind of like you asked me, what stuck out to you? And without fail, I had at least 6 or 8 people that day say, that dude, I can't remember his name. I think it was Matt. I said, Matt Pruitt. They're like, yeah. What was that word at the beginning of the show? And I said, verisimilitude. And they go, yeah, verisimilitude. It's the funniest thing because Matt, they have the Apes Among Us podcast.
So good.
And Matt had done an episode and it was right before he put it out right before he came on the show the first time a couple of years ago. And I heard the episode and he does this diatribe about verisimilitude. And I thought it was brilliant. It was like a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And after he came on the show, I called him up a couple of days later and I said, dude, I'm editing your show together. I want to change the intro and I want it to be all about verisimilitude. Can I use that audio from Apes Among Us and play it? He's like, absolutely. He said, you think people will be interested in that? It's amazing how it stuck to people. They probably still don't know what the word means, but they like it because of the way that he used it. And he talks about, it was part of, I don't want to give anything away, but there is a part in Matt's book where verisimilitude comes up and he talks about what that means and what it means to the Bigfoot community. So I just thought it was so cool, but there are a lot of big words. And to his credit, I think he starts out the book talking about that. And that's one of the things we talked about before the book came out when he was still getting it done. He's like, people have been telling me for years I need to dumb down talking Bigfoot. And I'm just refusing to do it because I don't think we have to do that. And I agree, man. I don't think dumbing it down is going to help anybody. I think it raises the bar. And anybody who reads that book, and everybody I've talked to who has read that book, says the same thing. It's one of the most brilliantly written books on the subject that they've ever read. And it goes into what it could be, what it might be. There's so much stuff to dig into. And Matt does it in a beautiful way. He's a really, really talented writer. So I can't wait for you to read it. And I can't wait for you to send me that text and let me know what you think about it.
Absolutely.
See if you like it as much as I did, man.
That's a really cool top 3. I like that top 3. That's awesome, Brian. Let's end with this. And you reminded me because you mentioned the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot conference is coming up really quick, but you're doing something really cool for that. Do you mind going over how you're going to be involved with that conference? It's a really cool thing that you're doing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's right up my alley. It's something I've done a couple of times. I've been to that conference a couple of times as just a spectator. I went the first year in 2021. Last year we were there as a vendor. And then this year, Marty and Nikki reached out to me and said, hey, we'd like you to be a part of this. We'd like you to handle the encounters portion of the show because they had, typically I think they would do some encounters after each one of the speakers. So it was kind of broken up throughout the program. And I think it's important because there's a lot of people who want to share their encounters live in front of those people. Some people have never told their stories before, and they're going to do it for the first time on that huge stage in front of 3,000 to 4,000 people. So they asked me if I would handle that. So I am. At 3:30 on Saturday, I will be handling the encounters portion. We should have some really cool encounters to be shared. So I'm really looking forward to it because normally the MC does it. RPG's the MC this year again. And normally it's just something sort of an afterthought, honestly, that the MC handled. But to be able to actually sit down on stage and let the people have their moment is really important to me. And I've already had a couple of listeners actually at my show. I was talking to one, I was texting him back and forth before I got on with you, who's going to be there to tell a story. And he's like, I'm nervous, man. And he's like, I don't think I could do it if you weren't going to be on the stage.
Wow.
I'm like, well, that's what it's all about, man. You don't have to be nervous. I got you. I got your back. I'm right there with you every step of the way. So I think that'll change the dynamic. That was sort of my idea. I told Marty, I think you need to have somebody as a moderator on the stage kind of walking people through it, because it is a tough thing just to hand a microphone to, Joe, who's never been up in front of anybody and talking and say, hey, there you go. But when you have somebody who's willing to take that journey with them and go right along with them every step of the way, physically on the stage, I think it's going to make a big difference. At least I hope so. So I'm really excited about it. I think you'll see, if you've been there before and you've seen how it's handled in the past, I think you'll see a marked difference this year in how the encounters are highlighted and really becomes part of the show. So,
that's really exciting. People that are attending that are going to get a real treat for sure. I've never had so many people ask me if I'm going to be at a conference. That's the conference. And I had to say this year, no, but we do have plans to be there for the 2024 conference. We'll be traveling down from Iowa to Gatlinburg, Tennessee for that, just because it is such an amazing conference. So it'll be a good time in 2024. But Brian, this has been such a fun chat. It's been long overdue. Do you mind taking a few minutes and just anything you want to throw out there, how people can keep up to date with what you're doing, all that good stuff? Now is definitely the time to throw it all out there.
Sure. If you want to listen to the show, anywhere you listen to Bigfoot Society, on any podcast app, you can get the show. We have a YouTube channel, Sasquatch Odyssey podcast on YouTube. You can check it out there. We're not just my show. There's tons of shows, really. We're sort of a network of shows. We have the Paranormal Odyssey in addition to Sasquatch Odyssey. I do a true crime show called True Crime Odyssey. And we've added a couple of other shows to our network recently. The Kentucky X-Files. We've got Tyler, Denny, and Josh. And we also just had the guys from the Basement Hangout, Chad and Bob, join the network. They're all going to be with me in Tennessee at the Gatlinburg conference. So we're going to have a huge time at the booth. So if anybody's in that area and you want to come by and see us, make sure you stop by the booth. And we're the first booth on Speaker Row. You can't miss us. As soon as you walk out, you're going to see us. We're going to be right in your face, right across from Seth Breedlove and those guys at Small Town Monsters with their huge booth. So yeah, and like I said, anywhere you can get your podcast, you can check out Sasquatch Odyssey. We'd love to have you listen and give those other guys a listen too. They do some fantastic shows, and yeah, check us out.
For my TikTok fans, follow Sasquatch Odyssey on TikTok, because it's got some really cool stuff over there, and we need more people to be hanging out with him on TikTok. But Brian, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great chat, and just have a great rest of your night, and can't wait to see what you come up with next, man.
Awesome. You too, Jeremiah. I appreciate it.
Here at Bigfoot Society, our goal is to provide a platform for those that have encountered Bigfoot to share their encounter in a safe and respected environment. But we need to hear your story. If you've experienced something that you just can't explain, please send me an email at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Then we can start the conversation. And I know a lot of you have not shared your encounter at all. It's been 20 years, and it's time that you get this off your chest, and then you can get some well-deserved rest, because I know you haven't been sleeping. I understand what you're going through, and I appreciate every one of you listening.